We're going to get the outside view. Bob Condotta from the Seattle Times covers the Seahawks. Sees a lot of wins out there, specifically in that building, Bob. And the Eagles win at home. They don't win on the road very often. So I would assume this is not the place to try to find a way to start a trend. Winning in Seattle, not very easy.
No, it's not. The St. Louis Rams did it last year, and I guess then moved to Los Angeles. Because
there's hope.
Shocking. But yeah, it's not easy to do. All good teams are just better at home. So everybody plays. I think for the most part, everybody plays better at home, and so really good teams maybe play great at home, and the Seahawks certainly have done that. So yeah, we've seen. What's interesting though is we've seen three of their home games have come down to essentially the last series this year. The Miami game and the Atlanta game and Buffalo. So teams have come in here and played kind of played head up with the Seahawks, but Seattle always does a good job of figuring out how to win it in the end, especially here.
Now, Bob, you said all great teams win at home. We talked about it with John before you came on in that, okay, we've seen a Super Bowl team, we've seen a Super Bowl runner-up, we've seen great defenses, we've seen head coaches go get jobs. Would you surmise that this is another great Seattle team?
I think it has the potential to be. Right now, I think they're as good as anybody in the NFC, and certainly when they play the way they did on Sunday at New England, they, a lot of their issues that they've had and some of the games they've struggled in so far are pretty explainable. Russell Wilson's had 3 pretty significant injuries that impacted the way he played, and as most teams, your offense is really centered around your quarterback. Seattle's maybe even more so, just because they do a lot of things with Russell running and his mobility and things like that, and that wasn't there for a little while, but you really saw the impact that made in the New England game. When he can scramble and extend plays and hit wide receivers who are wide open down the field and things like that. And then their defense is they played a few games there without Cam Chancellor and Michael Bennett. They'll still be without Michael Bennett, but they got Cam Chancellor back. You saw what an impact he can make in the game the other day. And so I still think, that some of their defensive numbers are not quite as dominant as they've been in the past, but I still think in general, this is a defense that's just about as good as what they've had the last few years.
And that's one of the matchups as we visit with Bob Condotta about the Seattle Seahawks that people are sort of drooling at which defense is stronger. And you talk about Michael Bennett being out, but they had some parts to put in there that are actually filling the void, right?
Yeah, Michael Bennett is a really good player, so it's hard to completely replace that, and it impacts your depth. Like most football teams, you have starters and you have backups, and they're starters and backups for a reason, and it's impossible really to ever completely replace really good players. But Frank Clark, a second-year guy, has come in as starting for Michael Bennett and has played really well. Cliff Averill, the other defensive end, is just having a great year. By far the best year of his career statistically, and probably deserves to get into the Pro Bowl this year for the first time. But Cam Chancellor was out for a while. They had a guy named Kelsey McRae step in and play pretty well for him. But Cam Chancellor is just a unique physical guy, and impossible to really be the exact same presence out there on the field that Chancellor is. But right now, other than Bennett, they're pretty healthy on defense, and I think you saw that kind of come to play in the New England game. I thought that was probably, despite the fact New England moved it at times on them, obviously Tom Brady's really good and knows what he's doing and stuff like that. But I thought in general that was a really good performance by the Seahawks defense, and I think they're hitting their stride a little bit.
So defense's strength. What are some of the Seahawks' weaknesses this year?
The offensive line has really been the work in progress thing all year long. They sort of made some decisions to allow some veteran guys to leave in free agency. They're trying to replace them with rookies or just other young players. And, then they've had a couple of injury issues on their offensive line as well. And so, I think by far, I don't even know if they would take offense at the thought that I think that's by far the weakest position group on the team, or certainly the one that you have the most question marks about. You've seen that in their rushing numbers. Their rushing numbers are way down this year, and a lot of that's due to Russell and the fact that he's not running. But a lot of it also is just due to the offensive line. They've struggled at times to just create openings and things like that. So I think that's by far the single biggest thing that they've sort of have to account for, and it just has to get better. But they felt like it really took a step forward in that New England game. They Russell had some time to throw when he needed it. They were able to get the running game going just enough to open up the rest of it, and so they're excited at least about what they felt was a real step in the right direction last week.
Bob Condotta's with us. Seattle Times covers the Seahawks. How does this kid Procise change things for that offense?
Yeah, well, he definitely, their entire running back core suddenly looks way different than it did just 2 weeks ago. I mean, Christian Michael been their starter for 7 games, and they up and released him this week with, Procise emerging. Thomas Rawls is going to be back. This will be the first game he'll have played in more than 2 months. A guy named Troy Pope, who was actually their leading rusher in the preseason. They released him. He got picked up by the Jets, didn't really play there, so they waived him. The Seahawks brought him back, but I think they're really excited about him. So you're going to see a completely different looking Seahawk tailback core here than they've had at any other point this season. But Rawls is really the guy that they're counting on to step back into it and be sort of your 15 to 20 carry a game kind of guy and carry it that way. Procise played really well the other night. I still think they envision him a little bit more as sort of a complementary back, and then a really good receiving back who they can do a lot of things with that way. He was primarily a receiver during his Notre Dame career, and that was why they drafted him, was to fill their role. They have a really specific role for a third down back that they've always sort of had here, a guy who would come in, kind of trade off with Marshawn Lynch in those situations, and so they envision Procise for that. So you'll definitely see him out there quite a bit, and you might see some of Troy Pope as well.
When you're digging around the locker room this week and kind of picking some of these guys' brains, what is the I don't want to say the fear, but the identity of the Eagles that concerns them the most? What name or what part of the ball kind of came up the most when you were talking about Philadelphia?
Yeah, well, I mean, guys like Darren Sproles. I mean, you hear the defensive guys; they really have a lot of respect for him. They've played against him a few times through the years now, and the way that they use him. Zach Ertz, caught a big touchdown pass against the Seahawks a couple years ago in the game in Philadelphia. Tight ends have always been something that sort of bothered the Seahawks, and it sort of did again the other night as well with all the catches that Gronkowski and Martellus Bennett had against them. So you definitely hear that. Carson Wentz. I think they're impressed by the way he's been able to get wins for a team as a rookie and do some tough things and all of that. And then not necessarily players saying this, but I think if you looked at what is the biggest matchup that I think you would wonder about from the Seahawks standpoint is what I was talking about earlier. I mean, their offensive line going against Philadelphia's defensive front. That's a lot of veteran guys there who are really good players and all that. And I think that's really the matchups to watch in this one from a Seattle standpoint, probably.
Bob, do you sense a letdown after the way they won on the road and that big excitement to win in New England?
I'm not the biggest guy in the world for thinking that impacts NFL teams as much as you think. I think generally these guys I think look at each week as sort of its own separate season and things like that. And I usually look at it a little more tangibly about how did they come through things physically. But certainly, yeah, I mean that was a pretty emotional win, but as regular season games go, and so we'll see. This team has been really good in general at bouncing back that way. If you sort of look, they've had some stumbles in the first halves of seasons. Usually, once they get into the second half of the season, they just really take off running, and it sort of doesn't matter if they've had a short turnaround or a long turnaround, or that was the big storyline here last week was they had this big emotional game against Buffalo, kind of a big physical game on a Monday night. They had to travel now to play New England on a Sunday, where they're going to be too tired and all that, and I don't think any of that really came into play in that game. So, we'll see. I just think I do think there's things about Philadelphia, the way they play, their defensive style, good offensive line too. If they can get running the ball at all in any sort of consistent manner, that's really the kind of thing that's bothered the Seahawks through the years. It seems it can run it.
Well, we'll see if the Eagles can end their road woes at the toughest place to play in Seattle. I'm sure Bob Condotta can vouch for that. Very tough, very loud, as we've chronicled all week long. And the Eagles and the Seahawks this Sunday. Coverage on 97.3 ESPN begins at 3. Thanks, Bob.
Okay, thank you.